'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Not only have I been the owner of Mint Mobile for the last few years, I've also been a customer. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities, so do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Selling a little or a lot? Do your thing however you cha-ching with Shopify, the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/offer23.
'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Selling a little or a lot? Do your thing however you cha-ching with Shopify, the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/offer23.
Hey girl, imagine a life where you feel supported, connected, and understood. I get it. Being a mom is hard, especially when you're spinning so many plates. We exhaust ourselves trying to create the perfect life for our family. You deserve to enjoy your family without the stress perfectionism brings. On this podcast, I provide practical and relatable life experiences. I teach women quick and easy to use strategies to help them reclaim their identity, reignite their marriage, and enjoy their children. If you're ready to be challenged, then pull up a chair, grab a pen and paper because it's about to go down. I'm Veronica Cisneros, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is the Empowered and Unapologetic Podcast. Hey ladies, welcome to the Empowered and Unapologetic Podcast. I'm your host, Veronica Cisneros. Today's guest is a licensed clinical social worker and is the CEO of Scaling Up. She has conducted trainings not only online and throughout the United States. Ladies, she has conducted trainings throughout the world. She offers EMDR intensives to clients to help them reprocess their trauma and reduce their symptoms faster. When she's not traveling, she sees clients in her private practice in Reno, Nevada. So ladies, please help me by welcoming Kelly Smyth-Dent. So Kelly, it's been forever. It feels like forever since I've last seen you. Like the last time I seen you, we were at a business retreat swimming with, oh my gosh.
Mantas.
I was going to say stingrays, but the stingrays, that would have been a totally different experience.
Very different. Yeah, the first time we ever met was that day, and we immediately went and just swam with mantas together. That was our first experience together.
Mm-hmm. At night.
Yeah, at night.
In the middle of the ocean.
It was fun. It was fun.
I totally had all trust in you. Complete trust in you, Kelly.
I was like, it'll be fine. I've done this before. And it was. It was fine.
It was definitely a bucket list item that I never thought I would put on my bucket list.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm so glad you went.
Me too. So Kelly, you and I hit it off so quickly. It was easy to talk to you. One thing that I completely admired is the fact that you take a totally great deal of pride in what you do. And I know, like, just by your personality and who you are, how open you are, how vulnerable you are, you don't mess around. You definitely don't mess around, especially as a clinician. And so that's why I definitely wanted to put you, I wanted to bring you on to the podcast. I know you could teach women, parents, moms, a whole lot. And so how did you get into becoming a clinician?
Great question. So I was initially working in the refugee resettlement field before I became a therapist. So that meant that refugees that were coming from, in this case, it was mostly Vietnam, Iraq, Bhutan, and Burma, also known as Myanmar. So they would arrive to the U.S. So refugees are people that are displaced due to usually it's like some sort of racial or some other kind of like human rights injustice that's happening. Usually it's someone's getting persecuted for their religion or something like that. Basically, they're just not welcome in their home country due to a human rights issue. So if that can't be worked out, then they come to the United States. And when they come to the US, there's government funding that will pay these agencies, one of which I worked for, called Church World Service. And we would essentially help them get on their feet. So we pick them up at the airport, we get them housing, we get them jobs, get them in English classes, all that stuff. And so I was doing that before I became a therapist. And part of what I was noticing when I was doing that work is that these refugees were coming to the US and they finally had homes and freedom, but emotionally and sometimes cognitively, they were definitely not free. They were, had a lot of trauma kind of holding them down, I guess, and causing them to not be able to keep jobs. And there wasn't always some towns have really great setups for mental health services for refugees, but some don't. And it's complicated because they're on Medicaid, so you have to find a Medicaid provider. They are from a different culture. They speak different languages. Interpreters are tough, mental health stigma, all that stuff. And so I decided to go into the mental health field to see if I could help fill in some of those gaps in the systemic, issues that we're all pretty aware of, specifically with refugees, but it's kind of expanded since then.
Absolutely. So you ended up starting on that track of becoming a therapist.
Yeah, I went back to school, got my master's degree in social work. And while I was getting trained in social work, I was starting to feel as a student, you're kind of thrown in, you're doing therapy and you're in school and it's a lot of work. So I'm in my internship and I'm just kind of feeling not well equipped enough to deal with all the trauma that was coming, because at least in my program, you learn a lot of theories and you learn about interventions, but you don't actually learn the interventions to use science. That's usually advanced training that you take outside of school. So when I was a grad student, I got EMDR trained, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's an evidence-based therapy used to help reprocess trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression. And so I got trained in EMDR and totally fell in love with it, drank the Kool-Aid, was just like, whoa, this is who I am. I love it. I got my own EMDR therapist, started doing my own EMDR work. And I also loved it because you can do EMDR as a group intervention, which is not always the case for all of the evidence-based trauma interventions. And in a group setting, you can do it with one interpreter for a large group of people. You can get faster results. You do it in an intensive model. And so and you don't have to talk about your trauma, which is really advantageous for a lot of people. So for refugees in particular, I was really attracted to that so that, I could use that intervention with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So right now, there's so many things that have gone on with the world, right? With all of our lives. I'm noticing that teens are being impacted substantially. There are a lot of things going on. Their ability to socialize with, just friends or other people that they go to school with. There's like this heightened level of anxiety. There's this pressure to go ahead and be liked. They've been stuck, between their four walls in their home for a very long time, listening to mom and dad argue, about politics, about life, finances, you name it. Now these kids are out. So I wanted to go over maybe a couple cases in where EMDR would be beneficial. And a lot of us don't know what EMDR is, right? A lot of our listeners, and have no clue that this can actually really help people, and it's not a Band-Aid. It's in no way, a gimmick. This is something that really focuses on trauma. And like you said, you're able to go ahead and reprocess trauma through a different lens. So it's not something that you're imprisoned by.
Right.
So I wanted to go over a couple things that I'm experiencing here in just a couple things, that I hear from our clients and a lot of clients we're getting, but also, with my daughters and what they're experiencing at school with their friends and what they're hearing from them. And so if you don't mind, I would definitely like to maybe, come up with a vignette. So a vignette is basically kind of like a little bit of a storyline. It's not going to be with regards to one individual person, but just overall. Let's say there is a 16-year-old, right? She's back in high school. She has a lot of friends. A couple of years ago during COVID, she found herself trying to fit in. She snuck out of the house. Her and her friends snuck out of the house. And then they ended up meeting boys. And she ended up having sex for the very first time.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't want to, but also she didn't know how to say no. And she left feeling all of these feelings, but said to herself, you know what? It's okay. It's not a big deal. Finally tells her mom and dad. And her mom and dad obviously are blown away by this discovery. And they start to see her and she's okay. She talked about cutting. She talked about ending her life, but they switched schools. She's no longer hanging around with that crowd. She's fine. Everything's fine. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're here together as a family. We're the best of parents. We're doing everything right. We're keeping those open lines of communication. Why is that enough? Why is that not enough?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let me give a little bit of a baseline understanding of how EMDR works, and then I think we'll fill in those gaps a little bit better. So the way that I explain EMDR, it's known as being an intervention for PTSD, but it actually expands to a lot more than just PTSD.
Yes.
In a situation like that, you can only be diagnosed with PTSD if you have a particular event that happened and then certain symptoms that have been prolonged since that event.
Yep.
So in this case, depending on what symptoms she has and how long they persisted, she might be diagnosable with PTSD after that event. She might not be. Not everybody develops PTSD after a traumatic event. And so if you don't, it doesn't mean that you weren't affected by it. Or it didn't, if it's not diagnosable, maybe you're not diagnosable with anxiety, depression, or PTSD or something else, but you're still a human being that's impacted by everything that happens.
Yeah.
Like whether it's a big trauma like a rape, or whether it's, something else. It could be societal messaging of racism or, other isms or systemic issues in society that aren't necessarily one particular event that's happened, but a lot
Mhm.
of microaggressions or smaller things that have happened that have accumulated over time. All of those things affect us. They affect our sense of self. They affect what we believe about ourselves. And this is all happening subconsciously.
Yeah.
So, depending on our coping strategies, our support system, our resiliency factors, it's not a one size fits all as far as what symptoms will develop and how that person will respond to it. So, certain experiences, people's brain have the ability to organically reprocess it on their own, and most people do. A lot of people don't develop PTSD, and they might have some residual effects from the situation, but it's not debilitating. It
Yeah.
doesn't affect all areas of their life all the time. That situation feels a little bit more obvious, like this is
Yeah.
debilitating, you can't function day to day, you need to get help. But
Mhm.
what about the people where it's not debilitating? You're still
Yeah.
up, but there's this residual internal feeling, messaging, lack of motivation,
Yeah.
weird dreams, disturbed sleep, disturbed eating, whatever it might be. That's very normal. And that happens pretty much to everybody. Just being a human being in an imperfect world, that just happens to people.
Mhm.
So one of the ways that I like to view it is with this like backpack metaphor. So imagine everybody's born and they're wearing a backpack and it's empty. You're right. You
Mhm.
come out of the womb. Some people have trauma in the womb.
Yep.
Most people don't. They come out kind of clean slate. But then they're thrown, these perfect little babies are thrown into an imperfect world, imperfect
Yeah.
parents, trauma, all the things. And so what I imagine is that every time they have negative messaging, a bad experience, a traumatic experience, you could grow up in a really healthy household, but get into a bad car accident, then have chronic pain, and then have, whatever things happen.
Yeah.
So your house catches on fire. I mean, who knows? It could be these external things happening. It might not be internally happening in the family system. Or, of course, it could be domestic violence, abuse, all those things. It could be all the above. So every time those traumatic, whether they're big traumas or what some people like to call as like little t traumas or smaller, more manageable traumas or something like
Yeah.
it's like throwing rocks into the backpack. So the bigger the trauma, the bigger the rock. And then those smaller, traumas or messaging are like little rocks in the backpack. So
Yeah.
over time, people can carry them around because we're very resilient, very strong people. But over time, that backpack starts to get heavy. It starts to get full. And you also have to develop coping strategies to carry that around.
Yep.
So coping strategies could be, using drugs or medication to help you sleep or to help you calm down at the end of the day. It could be feeling like you have a sense of control over cutting or eating or something like that. It could be lying, stealing, all sorts of things. A lot of exercise. It could, some coping strategies are healthier than others, as we know. And so the more rocks in that backpack, the more coping strategies you need to cope with that. So the way that I see the way EMDR therapy works is what if we didn't have to cope with those things all the time? What if we could actually start taking some of those rocks out of the backpack, essentially
Mhm.
lightening the load. So it's easier to carry because eventually that backpack gets really full and it's like overflowing.
Yeah.
At some point, that's just unsustainable no matter how many coping strategies you have. So the way EMDR works is it takes whatever components of memories of messaging internally, like I'm not a good person, I'm unlovable, it's my fault, I'm dirty, I'm ugly, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We all have those kinds of messages within us. It takes that messaging and then it also takes components of specific memories. So there could be a memory in this vignette of that night where she walked into a room alone and then all of a sudden, had this moment of, oh crap, like
Yeah.
I'm unsafe. And then she feels like she did it to herself. That could be the
Mhm.
scenario, it's her fault or she deserved it or something. So she's battling with those messages, or it could be a distinct smell or feeling, like the senses, it could be an image or something like that that you just can't get out of your head that often
Yeah.
amplifies at nighttime when it's quiet and you're trying to sleep and then you can't sleep and your brain needs sleep to process those things. So it kind of has this ripple effect.
Yep.
So what EMDR does is it degrades the intensity of those memories and that self-belief. So oftentimes, like I was working with a client once that just had this epiphany during EMDR. It was just like, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. And
Yeah.
maybe cognitively, this person knew that that was true, but in their body, it's just like, it felt like there was something wrong with them, and so EMDR can shift those belief systems internally and release it. And it can also degrade aspects of memories that are disturbing to you. So if you have a certain image or smell or component of a memory that just cycles through your brain over and over again, it can degrade or eliminate that intensity, the feelings around that are actually causing the disturbance. It doesn't take the memory away.
No.
It takes the internal kind of body sensation feeling about the memory and
Yeah.
puts it in a place that's manageable, kind of compartmentalizes it in a way. And so then if you're taking those rocks out of the backpack, you don't need those coping strategies anymore because you're not as disturbed by, and it doesn't mean that the memories of what happened to you are okay or that you're just going to be fine with it. It just means that the reaction to it isn't as intense. So it's instead of like a 10 out of 10, it's maybe a 3 or 2 or 1 out of 10, which is much more manageable and not as intrusive day to day.
I love your explanation of, it. I love the rock example, the rock analogy, because I think what we all do is we all believe that, well, it's just going to be fine. Everything's fine. And then, we're not seeing any signs or, they're not doing those signs anymore. So it's not that big of a deal. But a lot of us fail to realize that, no, that backpack is definitely getting heavier and heavier with it doesn't matter if it's little rocks, big rocks, it's definitely getting heavier and heavier with life experiences.
And it makes it harder to tolerate the new thing that happens.
Yes.
Right. So maybe somebody develops a belief of like, I'm not good enough or something like that. And they're managing it, they don't have that many experiences within that belief system, but then they get fired from a job and that amplifies that. It validates in their subconscious that belief that, well, that happened because I'm not good enough. So then their confidence goes down. It's harder to get another job or they're settling for other jobs. And then they get a divorce or somebody breaks up with them. And then the reason internally is because there's something wrong with them. And then it compounds. So over time, that belief, it gets so solidified inside of them. And it's not a true belief, but it feels true to that person. And if every situation after that becomes the reason, and it's deeper and deeper versus what if you didn't believe that about yourself?
Yeah.
And then those bad things happen, it's more manageable because you don't believe something's wrong with you. You're like, there's lots of reasons that happened, and it doesn't have to do with defects within me.
Absolutely. I kind of imagine it as unscrambling your brain. You're able to, right? You definitely are able to point at, okay, wait a minute. This was an incident that happened. I was able to heal from that trauma or that pain. And I can, anything else that comes in, it's not that we want to welcome all of the space for trauma, but it's not going to be so heavy because I've worked on it. And I do have the ability to go ahead and face other things that, with life the way it is right now, we are capable of going through it without it imprisoning us.
It's a little less confusing.
Absolutely.
It's less, it's more clear. It's more rational too, because trauma responses are very reactionary and emotional. They're not logical. Like it's logical why they're having the reaction, but the reaction is oftentimes like exacerbated. It's like bigger than it should be. And that's when you're having a trauma response, and that could be intergenerational. It could be, so for example, if somebody gets in a car and has a panic attack because they feel like they're going to die if they drive, that's a trauma response. That doesn't just pull up out of nowhere. Something has happened. And then it got lodged in the subconscious in a way that's causing the symptoms. The panic attack are just symptoms. Something has happened in that person's life that's creating those symptoms. So it's always about what has happened to you, not what's wrong with you. It's a common phrase that we use in the therapy world. And so digging back, EMDR goes to the root of it. What caused that reaction? Let's take the symptoms, go back. What caused those symptoms? Now let's work on the cause, because if the cause is reprocessed, then those symptoms aren't there anymore.
I know looking for the right therapist can be challenging. However, feeling overwhelmed and disconnected is even harder. Life is filled with several twists and turns, some more severe than others. We do our best to handle them as they come and find ourselves at a loss, not knowing what to do or who to turn to. The clinicians here at Outside the Norm Counseling are here to help. We are here to assist you through this time of need. Together, we will identify your strengths and goals and teach you healthy coping skills. Together, we will develop a plan to help you live the life you want to live. Our team is compassionate, genuine, and we take a great deal of pride in providing an empathetic, non-judgmental approach to all of our clients. It's time! You've waited long enough, whether it be for you, your child, or if you're in need of a couple session. We are highly trained clinicians ready to guide you. Schedule an appointment now by calling 951-395-3288. Again, that number is 951-395-3288. We're looking forward to meeting you and being a part of your journey.
Why is it important that, we talked about the backpack. Why is it important we go to therapy early on?
Yeah, so think about it like, in the medical field. Let's say you have a tumor growing, it might be smaller, manageable, less symptoms, but if it gets bigger, it gets harder to operate on. There's more of a process of getting it out, getting rid of it, so you can use the example of any sort of physical symptoms. If you're neglecting your health, if you're not being proactive about your health in some way, then we know, if you're not brushing your teeth every day, there's going to be effects to that. So if you're not doing things for your mentality and your body to take care of yourself day to day, or to respond to a situation that's happened to you right away, just like you would if you broke your leg and then you just don't go to the doctor, that's going to get worse. And you might have long-term problems because of it, because it just compounds so much over time versus getting it fixed right away. You actually might be able to find full relief and a full recovery from it. So not to say that people can't mentally fully recover. And EMDR is not a one size fits all. Like it's not the best fit for everybody, not because it can't help everybody, but because it's not everybody's cup of tea. There's a lot of interventions that some people love it. Some people are like, whatever. And some people don't like it at all. They think it's weird, and it is a little weird, and that's fine. That's why there's different therapists that do different types of interventions, and so I think it's important that you kind of find what works for you and make therapy and mental wellness a regular part of life, just like you would with your physical health, taking care of that, how you eat, and all of those things. So I think it just becomes harder to recover. The recovery process is more difficult and longer. It's more arduous if you wait, just like anything else.
Absolutely. What would you say are the reasons why maybe parents don't try EMDR for their kids?
I think that there's just an uncertainty about it. It seems strange. People like to be in their comfort zone, and EMDR is strange in the sense that, one of the ways in which you basically, the way it works is you bring up the memory, the thought that happened. So, okay, let me go back. You come into the office and the therapist is like, what happened to you? There might be a specific incident that happened that they're like, this is what's causing my problems. Or they come in and they're like, I have anxiety. Okay, those are symptoms. So let's work our way back and figure out what's causing those symptoms. And then once we figure out the cause, we do EMDR on the cause. So once you have the memory or the incident that you're doing EMDR on, you bring it up and it becomes activating. So these are memories that people are typically trying to not think about, to ignore, or whatever. So in EMDR, you're actually bringing them to the surface. So you have to be able to tolerate that. And then you're using eye movement. So it's like follow my fingers back and forth. You can also do tapping like this. You do tapping on your legs. Some people use ear, like noise beeping back and forth. So some type of bilateral means kind of back and forth. So some sort of bilateral stimulation that works for that person. What happens is it creates this kind of organic reprocessing experience inside your brain, inside your body, that allows your brain to organically reprocess that experience. That sounds super hokey and weird to a lot of people, and I
Yeah.
get it, you know? So for some people, they might just be like, that's just too weird for me. But I always go back to the science. It's been around for over 20 years, and there's a ton of evidence to show that EMDR works. And so, it's just kind of different strokes for different folks, I guess, but it's not going to hurt you to try. If you have a therapist that is properly trained, which is an important factor too, to figure out who's properly trained in EMDR, so that they're doing it properly. But if you have a competent therapist that is doing EMDR properly, it's not going to hurt you. These are memories that are already there. It's not like
Yeah.
you're bringing up something, you're not creating something that doesn't exist. These are already memories inside of you that are haunting you or bothering you. You're just bringing them to the surface and then giving your brain the space to reprocess it. So if that sounds too strange to somebody, then maybe that's why. But I usually go with the like, what's the harm in trying it? What if it really does help you the way that the research says that it will?
Definitely. I think another thing that kind of keeps parents from coming in, even to see a therapist, is it's fine. We want to believe everything's fine. We want to believe it's okay. It's something they'll get over. We just don't want to talk about it. And as long as we don't talk about it, then, she'll just ignore it, or eventually she'll just grow out of it. And this is not something that you will grow out of.
Denial is a very powerful coping strategy.
Yeah. And so unhealthy. So unhealthy.
Yeah.
So what have you seen with the clients that you've had? What progress have you seen working with them?
With EMDR?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times people come to me once they're at kind of a debilitating state, which is why we recommend people coming in earlier than that. So
Yeah.
they've lost their job. I've had someone come in it's a runner that was chased by a dog and now can't run, and has kind of lost that enjoyment in the process. And what I see in those clients, one, if it's a really specific incident, like I was doing this thing, then this thing happened, now I can't do that thing anymore. So maybe you got into a car accident, now you can't drive anymore. Or I have first responders that come and see me, and the vicarious trauma over time just gets to them, and then they just, maybe they act out. They yell at a superior or something like that, and then they're on leave, So in those cases, it looks like now that person can go back to work. Now that person can run again. Now that person can drive again. Sleep is a big one. Sometimes people aren't sleeping because they're having nightmares, they're having flashbacks. Those symptoms either subside significantly, so they're more manageable, or they completely go away altogether. So, flashbacks, flash forwards, sleeping, eating, jobs, driving, whatever that is. Now, when it comes to relationships, it can feel a little less obvious. So if you're in an abusive relationship, for example, it might be a process of kind of finding your voice. I've worked with refugees before who doing EMDR where they were in a particular situation where they were in a realistic fear environment. So sometimes we have a trauma and we have kind of this mostly unrealistic fear. So for example, like thinking every time you get into a car, you're going to die and having a panic. Like, yes, that could happen. It's not totally unrealistic, but it's probably not going to happen. And so, being able to drive is kind of an important aspect in life for the most part, unless you live in a walkable city, which is mainly just New York in the United States.
Right.
But relationally, a lot of times it might look like standing up for yourself, being able to think outside the box. So with the refugee situation, they were basically kind of glued to their phone, waiting for this news that they were going to be sent back to their home country where they were being persecuted, which basically meant sending them to death.
Yeah.
And so that very realistic fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what happened is, let's say from 0 to 10, 10 being the highest fear you can imagine, 0 being none or neutral, their fears at like a 10 or 11. That's going to be like all consuming inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
Versus what happened when we did EMDR with them around that realistic fears, it went from a 10 to a 3. So the fear is still there because it's a realistic fear that's going to be used to help protect them in this scenario, this real life fearful scenario. But when your fear is a 3, it's more manageable. So then
Yeah.
what happened is it looked like they were brainstorming, they were problem solving. Instead of just feeling frozen and obsessed with just looking at their phone and not being able to do anything and just being
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed by the feeling of anxiety, now their anxiety, they had some space to kind of figure out what to do with the anxiety. Whereas when you're at a 10, it's so consuming. There's
You're in
no
panic mode.
ability. It's kind of like it's just right here. It's like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
can't see anything else. Versus if it's out here, it's like, I know you're there and I'm going to look at all this and kind of piece together what I can to solve the problem and get me out of it.
Yep.
Could be setting boundaries in relationships that you didn't have the confidence to do before, or even think about what boundaries are available to you.
Absolutely. What would you say are the effects of, well, scratch that. How can we best support those that are struggling with trauma? How can we best support them as a parent? How can we best support them as a friend?
That's such a great question. I think validation, believing them is a really big one. Don't invalidate somebody's traumatic experience and question whether it happened and challenge what happened.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I mean, I've worked with people where that experience is more trauma
More traumatic.
than
Hmm.
actual trauma. So first
Absolutely.
and foremost, you believe your loved ones and you allow them to share with you what they're willing to share, but of course they don't have to share if they don't want to. With kids, it's a little bit different. You might have to get some information in order to protect them. Um, but that I think is first and foremost. And maybe it could be finding them a good therapist. Sometimes after a trauma, you're lacking motivation. You might feel kind of frozen, like you can't act. And so having somebody, I've had clients have people schedule the appointments for them, drive them to their first appointment, maybe the first 2 appointments, and then that person kind of gets settled in and can do it themselves.
Yeah.
Depending on how strong their reaction is, you can do things like that to support them. But part of the resiliency factor in being able to organically process some of these things on your own is having a supportive community and network, which means they believe you, they validate it. Sometimes it just means being there. Maybe that person can't get out of bed. And so you go and you clean their house while they're in bed and you do some dishes and you reschedule some of their appointments or something just to support them as they're kind of getting back on their feet after a trauma. Sometimes that happens with traumatic grief,
Yeah.
they suicides and then, the family member is or they die in a car accident or, something really sudden and shocking. And then all of a sudden that family member is dealing with grief, but also the trauma of the loss because it was a traumatic loss. That can be really shocking to the system to the point that you can't function for a period of time.
Hmm.
So it really just depends, I think, on the scenario, but definitely encouraging them in a non-judgmental way to get help.
How do we find somebody who is certified, or how do we find somebody that knows their shit? Because I feel like a lot of us, unless we're therapists, we don't know where to go. We don't know what questions to ask.
Mhm.
So I guess that would be a two-part question. What questions should we be asking, when we do talk to a therapist, and how do we find a really good one?
That's a great question. So with EMDR, there is a governing body that kind of oversees the trainings and the trainers for EMDR. It's called EMDRIA, EMDRIA. It stands for EMDR International Association. I think it's emdria.org is the website. On that website, they have a find a therapist, find an EMDR therapist. So you can find one in your area and you can filter it in different ways. What you want to look for, ideally, in my opinion, is a therapist that is certified or a consultant or a trainer, because you can get trained in EMDR and then not do any follow-up trainings or
Mm-mm.
certifications or consultations, and they're just not going to be as experienced if that's the case. Now, you could be very experienced and not get certified. So it's hit or miss.
Yeah.
But it's a more guarantee if you see someone that's certified, and it will say on the website if they're certified or a consultant or trainer, that means that they do this day in and day out. They're very experienced. They're doing advanced trainings. They know what they're doing. So I would start there. And then there's different ways in which you can do EMDR, which I also think is cool. So you can find someone on your insurance, see them once a week, do the weekly thing, which is the standard model of therapy. You can find people out of pocket. They can do more variety of types of ways to do therapy. So, for example, I only do EMDR intensives, which means people come to Reno, Nevada, which is where I live, and they come for 1 or 2 days, and we do full days of EMDR therapy. And from what we can see in the research, EMDR works the same, whether you're doing it week to week or in an intensive model, but it just works slower if you're doing it week to week, because I'm doing 6 hours of EMDR a day with somebody that would normally take 6 weeks if you're doing week.
Yeah.
So you're just getting the same exact results. You're just getting them faster. You're also paying more money up front to do it because insurance doesn't cover that. So if you have the resources and you want fast results, you can do something like that. If you don't, you can find a week-to-week therapist, pay out of pocket, get insurance, see someone under insurance, something like that. So there's a lot of variety in which you can do it, but making sure you find somebody that uses EMDR a lot, knows what they're doing, and then also that you have good rapport with them. So not every therapist is going to be a good fit. They might be a great EMDR therapist, but something about their mannerisms or the way they talk or joke or whatever just doesn't fit for you, then you're going to be a little bit guarded or kind of annoyed, and that's not good for anybody. And so
No.
finding somebody that you're comfortable with, and just, so, I recommend seeing maybe 2 or 3 therapists in the same week and just telling them like, hey, I'm seeing a couple different people. I'm trying to figure out who's a good fit for me. And if the therapist has a problem with that, I personally think that would be a red flag of like, maybe you shouldn't see
Bye.
that person anyway. But most therapists, I think, would be like, that's great. Let me know what questions I can answer for you. And, I always tell people if I'm not a good fit, I'll help you find someone that is. I've got a ton of referrals. I take no personal offense to it. I just want you to get the best situation you can for yourself.
Absolutely. So when we're in therapy and we're at our first session, what should we expect?
It's different for everybody. Some people move into the reprocessing of EMDR, meaning the eye movement, faster than others. I move into it pretty quickly. So I do a very intense intake process online where they're answering a lot of questions and things like that online, so that when they show up in my office, I have a pretty good sense of things. And then they're filling in a lot of the gaps, versus other therapists don't do it that way. They're doing the intake process in session. They might spend the whole first session just digging into their history and things like that. And both approaches are completely fine. It's really kind of personal preference of the therapist and what their style is and their training and their comfortability. So it could be deep dive into history taking. That will be the case, I think, for a lot of therapists, because we do need to have a good sense of the client in order to best create what we call a conceptualization, a case conceptualization of what's going on with this person, where are these symptoms and these beliefs coming from, what do we need to focus on with EMDR, and then ultimately come up with a treatment plan, similar to going to see a doctor. And they need to get all this history and information about you and diagnose you properly and come up with your treatment. It's very similar with the therapy world. So I would expect that in the beginning. That's very normal. And then a lot of times with the EMDR therapists, you're going into what we call resourcing, which is basically helping to teach you mental coping strategies so that when it gets really intense in EMDR, you can tolerate it better versus avoiding it. Because if you just avoid it and shut it down, EMDR is not going to work. There has to be that activation attached to it. And if you're comfortable with that and okay with it, you can move into it faster. But if you're used to avoiding and tampering that down, then the therapist might need to work a little bit more in the resourcing piece to help expand your window of tolerance, is what we call it, where you can tolerate thinking about the memory and bringing it up in order for EMDR to work. So depending on your case and how you're responding to symptoms, it could move slower or faster depending on a lot of those things.
I love being able to get it done in those 2 days. And yes, it is intense. However, being able to go ahead and process through, opening it up, I can see how that's so beneficial. Um, so with all this, so we're in therapy. What are the effects? Like, how long does this last? And I know we've talked about, that the memory, the memory is not so imprisoning.
Mhm.
So are we going to need to come back to EMDR 5 years from now, 6 years from now for the same case? Or do we find like complete healing?
That's a great question. Well, one, kind of going back to something you were just mentioning, something that people will also do with the EMDR intensives is they might be seeing a regular therapist come and do an intensive to do some
Yes.
fast work on something and then go back to their regular therapist or marriage counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a trauma that's kind of holding this person back from accomplishing whatever they're doing in couples therapy. So that person will come do EMDR to kind of unblock this area. And then when they go back into therapy, kind of releases and allows them to process that. So there's lots of ways you can do it, at least in intensive, especially like in the midst of helping you accomplish
Yep.
goals. But what to expect as far as timeline? So really it depends. From my experience, I would say on two different factors. One is this an isolated incident that's not connected to any other memories? So the way that we view EMDR from a clinical perspective is we call them memory networks. So if you imagine everybody has like a variety of memory networks, kind of let's say lined up. And maybe there's a memory network of feeling of around like safety and control, like they feel unsafe. Maybe that memory network of feeling unsafe exists because they grew up in an unsafe household, there was violence, or maybe they lived in an unsafe neighborhood, or maybe they were attacked as a kid on the street or whatever. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
That person's memory network, there's going to be a lot more memories inside of that network to reprocess that are creating that feeling of lack of safety and the coping strategies around it. That one's going to take longer to
Mm-hmm.
reprocess because there's more in there. It's just
Yep.
a numbers game, basically. Whereas if you grew up in a really safe environment, everything's all good, and then all of a sudden you have this one isolated incident where maybe you were attacked or mugged or something like that, and now all of a sudden you feel unsafe. But if that's the only memory in that network that's creating that, then your brain is going to process that one memory much faster. So I've had some people that could process incidences in a few hours.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's linked to childhood, maybe attachment wounds, like ongoing traumatic stress, prolonged experiences from childhood where your brain is still developing, it's just going to take longer.
Yeah.
So that could be multiple days of intensive. So that's where some people might just come for a day or two. I know a clinician that does 3 to 5 days in a row of intensives. Some people will do a 2-day intensive and then come back a few months later to see what's still lingering and what's kind of resolved itself.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on those factors, 1-2 days could be enough to accomplish that particular goal that you have. It's not going to necessarily heal everything. But if you have a particular goal, it might help accomplish that. But if it's a little bit deeper and bigger, you might need more time than that. So it really depends.
Yeah. Um, I One thing you highlighted is, that level of willingness. If there is difficulty with processing some of the emotions, or even if there's some form of restraint, it's not that you're doing it on purpose, but you guys are processing through something extremely traumatic, that triggers all of these other incidents that happened in childhood or in correlation with it. Um, with that being said, what is one tip you would give somebody if they were going in for intensive EMDR therapy?
Mm, like preparing themselves leading up to it.
Well, sure, or just like peace of mind.
Hmm. Well, I think it depends on your how your brain works. So some people are like, I'm gonna research the hell out of this, and
Yeah.
watch all the YouTube videos and read all the research. I have clients that do that, and that suits them, it makes them feel better, and that works for them. And then some people are more like, I'm not gonna think about it till I get there, and then they arrive and they're so nervous. And so we spend some time in the beginning helping to soothe their anxiety and make sure that they know that they're in control of the experience and answering their questions and laughing some and just kind of helping that guard go down. Some people need more of that. So I think a big thing, whether it's going into EMDR intensives or something else, is really being honest with yourself about what you need and then giving it to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and not judging it. If you need to research hours and hours and hours of EMDR to feel comfortable, that's great. Do it. Give it to yourself. You don't need to judge that, just
Yeah.
let that be your process and let somebody else's process be different. And that's okay. Just embrace who you are, embrace what you need, give yourself what you need. Oftentimes, whether we have trauma or not, we deny our needs as individuals, especially as women too. We're taught to do that. So I think just being honest with yourself, giving yourself what you need. Also, whether it's working with me or somebody else, most therapists will offer a free consultation. I offer a free consultation leading up to an intensive to make sure that you're a good fit for me, I'm a good fit for you, answering your questions, scheduling, all that sort of thing. So most therapists will offer that, especially for an intensive, and I would take advantage of that to help prepare yourself.
I love that. How can we find you? So let's say we're ready to do it. How can we find you?
You can find me on my website. It's kellysmythdent.com. So my last name is Smyth, Smyth, Dent, D-E-N-T, like a dent in a car. So kellysmythdent.com. And you can contact me there. You can learn about intensive. There's some videos there. And like I said, if you just reach out to me, I'll schedule a 20-minute free phone consultation. We'll get to know each other, answer your questions. And then if it's the right fit, we'll move forward.
I love it. Kelly, thank you so much for being on here. This was
You're
amazing.
welcome. Thanks
I
for
feel like
having me.
I got a whole course on EMDR.
I know EMDR is amazing and everybody does it differently. So just find the right therapist for you, whether it's me or somebody else. And also I have a different website where we have a directory of EMDR therapists that you can check out. It's called scalingupemdr.com. It's actually a training website for therapists because we train therapists in EMDR and advanced trainings, but there's a button at the top that says directory and it has EMDR therapists that we've trained listed by state. So that's another directory you could check out.
Are they all certified and consultants?
Not necessarily, but they
Okay.
have taken advanced trainings. And so usually that indicates that they're using it. And usually people aren't going to take advanced trainings if they're not using EMDR
definitely.
So it is a safer bet, but we don't necessarily screen for that in our directory. So you might need to ask them specifically or cross-reference it with the EMDRIA website.
I love that. I love that. Kelly, thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
We can all use a little help in our marriage, especially when it comes to communicating. I have created a guide just for you. And guess what? It's 100% free. I will give you practical tips and easy-to-use strategies to apply right now. That's right now, today. You all know I'm a huge advocate for you mamas, and I am on a mission to help you experience true connection and stress-free living. Ladies, we are setting our marriages up for success. It starts with you. You will find this freebie here in my show notes or go to empoweredandunapologetic.com/guide. The information I will be providing you is next level, and people pay good money to get these tips that I will be giving you for free. Don't forget to share this with a friend who needs it. What's up, ladies? Just want to let you guys know that your ratings and reviews for this podcast are greatly appreciated. If you love this podcast, please go to iTunes right now, write a review, rate the episode, and subscribe. Don't forget to share it with your friends.
Hey there, this is Casey McGuire Davidson, host of the Hello Someday podcast. I'm an ex-red wine girl turned life coach who helps busy women change their relationship with alcohol. I spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder while drinking a bottle of wine a night to unwind. In the Hello Someday podcast, my goal is to teach you the tried and true secrets of creating and living a life you don't want to escape from. Each week, I'll bring you tools, lessons, and conversations to help you drink less and live more. I'll teach you how to navigate our drinking-obsessed culture without a buzz and how to turn the decision to stop drinking from your worst-case scenario to the best decision of your life. You can find new episodes of the Hello Someday podcast every Thursday, wherever you listen. And I hope you check it out.
Addiction impacts all of us. Addiction's consequences run through all of us. From ourselves to our loved ones and through our communities, addiction creates so much loss and grief. My name is Dwayne Osterlin, and I'm the host of the Addicted Mind podcast, a show featuring personal stories, expert guests, and vital information about addiction and addiction recovery. We'll talk with leading treatment providers to discuss the latest research and treatment options for this devastating disease and advocate for mental health awareness. We discuss topics like the importance of creating a community of support, to helping loved ones, to some of the latest research on psychedelic medicines. The Addicted Mind podcast has been about creating hope, listening to stories of many amazing people that have overcome addiction and are thriving. If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, subscribe to the Addicted Mind podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or check out theaddictedmind.com. New episodes every Monday. See you there. Addiction impacts all of us. Addiction's consequences run through all of us. From ourselves to our loved ones and through our communities, addiction creates so much loss and grief. My name is Dwayne Osterlin, and I'm the host of the Addicted Mind podcast, a show featuring personal stories, expert guests, and vital information about addiction and addiction recovery. We'll talk with leading treatment providers to discuss the latest research and treatment options for this devastating disease and advocate for mental health awareness. We discuss topics like the importance of creating a community of support, to helping loved ones, to some of the latest research on psychedelic medicines. The Addicted Mind podcast has been about creating hope, listening to stories of many amazing people that have overcome addiction and are thriving. If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, subscribe to the Addicted Mind podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or check out theaddictedmind.com. New episodes every Monday. See you there.
Hey there. This is Casey McGuire Davidson, host of the Hello Someday podcast. I'm an ex-red wine girl turned life coach who helps busy women change their relationship with alcohol. I spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder while drinking a bottle of wine a night to unwind. In the Hello Someday podcast, my goal is to teach you the tried and true secrets of creating and living a life you don't want to escape from. Each week, I'll bring you tools, lessons, and conversations to help you drink less and live more. I'll teach you how to navigate our drinking-obsessed culture without a buzz, and how to turn the decision to stop drinking from your worst-case scenario to the best decision of your life. You can find new episodes of the Hello Someday podcast every Thursday, wherever you listen, and I hope you check it out.
I know we've been taught that motherhood requires alcohol. I know we've been taught not to question our relationship with alcohol until we've lost everything. And I know we've been taught that if we do dare to examine our relationship with alcohol, we need to head straight to AA and declare ourselves an alcoholic who is powerless to alcohol forever. But what if all that isn't true? That's definitely not my story. I'm Suzanne, the host of the Sober Mom Life podcast. I'm an influencer who stopped drinking in January 2020, and since then, I've been telling the truth about motherhood, influencing, alcohol, and sobriety. If you suspect deep down that glass or 3 of wine at night might just be making motherhood harder, well, you're right. Come and join me as I chat with other sober and sober-curious moms. Let's laugh, cry, and normalize sobriety together, all while we reheat our coffee for the 4th time today.